Welcome back to Digicoin Daily. Today we've got a fascinating topic on our hands. The recent developments surrounding the SEC chair, Gary Gensler's challenging role in the decision-making process regarding Bitcoin ETFs. Anthony Pompliano, the founder and partner of Pomp Investments, was recently on CNBC television to discuss the topic. Bitcoin price response. Speaking of Bitcoin's price, we witnessed an immediate price action response to the overturning of the decision. Gains were noticeably wiped out. It got me wondering, why did we see gains in the first place, and should we be patient with the process? Here's what Anthony had to say.
In terms of the price action in response to the overturning of the decision, we saw all of those gains wiped out. And you said that it's sort of not a surprise. So, why did we see those gains in the first place? And what is so the play right now is to be long, is what you're saying.
I think that Bitcoin's really interesting. It was up like 80% to start the year. It's now down to about 60% up since the start of the year. In July and August, it was down. September's historically been a pretty bad month for Bitcoin. So you get some of those like seasonality type stuff that are playing in here as well. But people who pay attention every single day to the crypto industry, they're not surprised. I think what's happening though is you've had a turning of the holder base, right? You used to have all crypto native people who held Bitcoin. Now you're starting to get more Wall Street people, kind of retail investors, and so those people who don't pay attention 24/7, 365, they're probably a little surprised, but the crypto native folks, they kind of expected this.
Regulation and Gary Gensler. The CNBC host seemed to be intrigued by Anthony Pompliano's response, and another host asked Anthony the question, "What are your thoughts on the way SEC Chair Gensler and the SEC are handling this situation?" Listen to Anthony's response.
What do you think about the way that Gensler, the head of the SEC, has navigated this whole thing?
Yeah, I think he's got an impossible job, right? If you think about what the regulators have to do is they basically want to encourage innovation. I call it like embracing the entrepreneurial DNA of the United States. We want to be a leader, both in capital markets and in technology. At the same time, they want to protect investors. And so I think that what they've been very clear about is their perspective, which is Bitcoin is the asset that has kind of passed through that regulatory threshold. It is not a security, it's a commodity, and they're kind of treating it that way. The rest of the assets, they obviously think are securities. And so there's obviously some litigation that's going on. There's a lot of debate and I think disagreement between the crypto community and regulators. But the beauty of America is that people will go to court, they're going to lay out their arguments, and the courts will decide. Sometimes the regulators will be right. Other times the regulators won't be right. But that's why we have those court systems and the judicial system, and it makes America the greatest country in the world.
Sympathy towards regulators. The reaction from the host of CNBC is one of surprise. They weren't expecting Anthony to come off as a voice of reason and sympathy. This response led to more questions from the panel.
You sound, admittedly, I'm kind of surprised. You sound a little more sympathetic towards Mr. Gensler as maybe I would have expected, because many who share your passion and advocacy for Bitcoin have been much more harsh towards him.
At the end of the day, we can yell and scream, we can argue, name call, do all the things that people do, but we still have to work together, right? At the end of the day, the regulators are always going to be the regulators. And so my thought process is if we spend our time more focused on educating and kind of trying to bridge that gap, get them to understand why this technology is important, how it's already helped quite a bit of people, that's probably a more productive use of energy and time than it would be to sit and just yell and scream at each other. Because at the end of the day, the yelling and the screaming just gets people to dig their heels in, and then people don't want to work together, right? But my belief is that a Bitcoin ETF will be approved in the United States of America. It will lead to billions and billions of dollars of inflows. At the same time, I think that regulators are having to get up to speed. They're getting educated. And the more that they learn, the more they realize the technology is not going away.
Impact of Bitcoin ETF approval. I'm sure we're all thinking the same thing. If Bitcoin is approved in the US, how will this impact the market? How will this impact the trading exchanges? Guess what? The CNBC host asked that very question.
Let's go back and assume that a Bitcoin ETF is approved. How do you think about the trades? We saw initially Coinbase go up, but you sort of wondered, do you need something like a Coinbase if you can buy an ETF on any exchange, on your Schwab account, for instance? So how do you think about it?
So, we're an investor in Coinbase, have been for a long time. And I think that if you're a retail investor and you wanted exposure to Bitcoin over the last 2, 3, 5 years, you probably went and figured out a way to do it, right? And so I don't think that there's a ton of inflows that are going to be happening from retail investors. I do think, though, that sovereign wealth funds or very large institutions, they're not going on Coinbase and buying, spot Bitcoin, right? And so I think that that's where the ETF inflows could happen. I think Coinbase has done a fantastic job. They've onboarded more people to Bitcoin than any other company in the country or in the world. And if you look at by being a public company, what they've really done is they've held the flag and said, look, we want to be a regulated institution. We want to be a big brand. I think they're doing a fantastic job.
Use cases for Bitcoin. Shifting focus to use cases. Do you think Bitcoin is any closer now than it was 2 years ago to finding a concrete use case beyond being a store of value? Listen to how cleverly Anthony answers this question.
You talked about a moment. I want to just get back real quick to use case stuff. You talked about stable coins and you talked about these astounding statistics that you pointed out. What about for Bitcoin? Do you think we're closer now, any closer now than we were, say, 2 years ago about real use case for Bitcoin? Because I feel like that's still suspect.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question, right? And the first part of that, you have to define what is the use case. And so some people will say, hey, it's a store of value. We're going to buy it, we're going to hold it, and we're never going to sell it, and it's going to be this amazing way to protect our purchasing power. Other people want it to be the electronic cash that was kind of mentioned in the white paper, and we're going to all drop dollars and go spend Bitcoin. I tend to think that there's a sequence to it. Maybe it becomes that electronic cash, maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure. But I know today for sure it's being used as that store of value. It's $500 billion asset. There's tens of millions of people, if not hundreds of millions of people around the world that buy it, they hold it, and they simply just want to protect their purchasing power, right? You could think of it as like a digital gold. And from that standpoint, holding is a use case, right? Now, if you then start to evolve the definition of use case and say, hey, I need it to be that electronic cash, sure, it has really high transaction volumes and has all these different applications that people are trying to build, but I don't think anyone with a straight face would say, hey, Bitcoin is replacing the US dollar today for the majority.
I mean, people have done that, though.
And there you have it. This was another complex and dynamic topic that I hope you enjoyed. Please remember to like and subscribe to Digicoin Daily. See you next time.